it's like a big party in the streets wherever you go, and everyone is outside and they're grilling and they're visiting their neighbors and they're drinking Coke, and they're just having this big party and they're shooting off fireworks and there's music and dancing, and it's like a big thing. And then he comes to West Michigan in January and it's snowing and the wind chill is below zero, and he didn't own a winter coat before he got here and had never shoveled snow before. And I'm like, okay, we're going to watch the ball drop. And here we are just sitting in my mom's house on our own without any people over. And we're, watching this thing on TV. And he was like, that's what we've been sitting here waiting for. So definitely not quite the excitement that he was used to in South Africa.
Welcome to Book Therapy. I'm your host, Kim Patton. There's no way to count how many books are floating around in this world. Some are decent, some are truly terrible, and some are great. Today we're going to take a deep dive into one great book. Together we will discover gems of truth and encouragement to help you as a foster and adoptive family raise kids from hard places. You're ready, I'm ready, let's get this party started. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Book Therapy. I have a special guest for you today with a really unique story. I think that it's one that we've never covered before, and I hope you all will really enjoy it. Before we get to that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for your support for the Foster Mama Friend Journal. The journal was created for foster mamas to have a place to keep track of the kiddos in their house and also reflect on things to be grateful for, even in the hard moments. And then there's like 150 pages of free journaling. So if you have kids from hard places in your life and you want a space to process through all that goes with that, the Foster Mama Journal is your friend. And speaking of foster mamas, if you have any in your life, send them this podcast. I hope it will encourage them. Okay, on with the show. Let's dive into the book. Today we are talking about A Place to Land, A Story of Longing and Belonging by Kate Motaung. And I am so privileged to have Kate with me today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Kate is special because a couple reasons. I have had this book on my to-read list for probably 7 years. I first heard her speak several years ago, and I was very moved by her story, and it took me a really long time to get around to actually reading the book, but I'm so thankful that I waited because now I have a podcast and I get to meet her, and that is way more fun for me. So I loved the book. It's a memoir about longing and belonging and the definition of home. And another thing that's special about Kate is that she lives in Grand Rapids, or the greater Grand Rapids area now, with her family. And when I read her book, I was drawn back to all the memories of growing up in Michigan and how special that place is to me. And I loved how she was so honest and vulnerable in this book. And Kate, you have been through a lot, and thank you so much for sharing your story. And thank you for being honest and not sugarcoating anything and just telling us the real truth of everything that you've experienced. And I'm excited to talk to you about it today. So we're going to start first in your home in Michigan. You were raised in Michigan, and you experienced a broken home when you were very young. You and your sister Sarah, this new person came into your dad's life. Her name was Angela, and that was very hard for you because the divorce was final, and Angela became your dad's new wife, and that was very surprising. And you kind of tried to pull a parent trap to where you tried to get them back together, but you say on page 41, "My plan was failing. Instead of going to Dad's house, we would be going to Dad and Angela's house. The addition of those two words fueled my animosity. I stepped it up a notch and launched a campaign to get Sarah to join my endeavors. I begged and pleaded with her to be mean to, but she wasn't persuaded." This began a long period of time where you struggled with Angela in your life. Can you talk to us about that?
I did, yes. So my dad left when I was 7, and I had one younger sister at home, and I didn't know any other people whose parents were divorced at that time. So even that was an unusual circumstance that was not not familiar to me. And so I knew that I still loved my dad and I didn't want to blame him for what happened. And so when this new woman came onto the scene, I just decided to blame her instead because I didn't even know her and I still wanted to love my dad. So I was downright mean to her as a young child and even in my early teen years and into high school, I was just nasty to her. And I am not proud of that. I am very ashamed with how I acted towards her. It was my way of trying to process at the time. But looking back, it was something that the Lord continued to convict me about as I grew in my walk with him. And I realized eventually, after many, many years, that I really needed to repent of my actions and ask for the Lord's forgiveness and her forgiveness, which I will probably chat about a little bit later as well.
It sounds like you also were internalizing a lot of pity on yourself because you didn't know a lot of families that were broken. Divorce wasn't a common thing in your community. And so you were ostracized a little bit and you struggled with comparison and envy and jealousy. It says that you felt sorry for yourself rather than showing concern for the less fortunate. I languished in a puddle of self-pity. I had no peripheral vision for the margins. And that would change. God would open your eyes to people in the margins. I think everybody has something in their life where they feel left out of. They feel like they are the exception. I felt this very much in infertility. You sit at a table with a group of women and you look around and you just think about all the ways that you are different and you don't fit in. But I think that everybody at that table is also thinking the same thing. They're thinking, oh, I don't fit in. I'm different. All of these people have this in common and I don't. Your struggle growing up was my family is different from everyone else. And so it did lead you to make some choices that you're not proud of now. But I do love the redemption story and the way that God convicted you to call her. And I enjoyed the way you wrote about it because it was all dialogue. And so I got to hear the whole conversation. I felt like it was a private conversation and a really hard conversation. I mean, you were crying, she was crying, and you pushed out the hardest words of all. You say, "Will you please forgive me?" And when I was reading that, I was so proud of you, and also just I understand the pain that conversation welled up in you because you had been carrying this burden for so long and you didn't want to ask for forgiveness. But when you did, talk to me about the freedom that you felt after that conversation.
Yes, it really was years of me sensing that the Lord was prompting me to ask for forgiveness from my dad's girlfriend. And I just kept, every time I would say to the Lord, yes, Lord, I know that that's something that I need to deal with, but what's something else that I could work on instead? And I kept pushing it off. Anytime during a worship service when we were called to, pray a silent prayer of confession, the Lord always brought that to mind first, and I kept pushing it away for years and years. And eventually it just came to a head and I could not ignore it anymore. And so I did end up picking up the phone and calling my dad's girlfriend and just asking her. I said, I know that I've been awful to you. I've behaved terribly. Will you please forgive me? And I was so nervous. I was like shaking. I didn't know how she would respond. And the Lord was so gracious in that. And she offered her forgiveness to me, and I cried and she cried, and it was this beautiful, unexpected experience. And as soon as I hung up the phone, I did just feel like this huge burden had been lifted from me that I didn't fully realize how much of that weight I had been carrying for so long, just knowing that I had behaved in a way that didn't honor the Lord or her. And then finally getting to the point where I was putting aside my pride, my bitterness, and all of it, and asking for her forgiveness. And the Lord was gracious that she did offer it to me. And it was just the most amazing feeling once that conversation had transpired.
And later you talk about the relationship between you and your dad and Angela and your sister. And then a lot of the book talks about your mom. And growing up in Michigan, it was really your mom and your sister that I kind of viewed that as the foundational family that kind of gave you the most emotional security was your relationship with your mom and your sister. I love the visual of you guys scraping wallpaper off the wall and finding 11 layers. And then when you got to the bottom, the fact that it was little Dutch boys and tulips and you lived in Holland, that was cracking me up. Yeah, that slimy wallpaper.
Yes,
I remember my mom hanging
stencils on the
wallpaper.
wall. I
It's
don't
just
even know
so
how old it
slimy.
was, but it
She had
was
to put it
quite
in the
something.
bath. I think those days are over, right? Are we done with the slimy wallpaper days?
I hope so.
You, as a teenager, do start to feel called to missions, and you're able to enjoy many experiences out of state, out of country, with your church. But one experience really stuck out to me, and my grandfather worked at the Meltrotter Mission for several years. He would preach there, he would go on Saturdays. My grandma would play the piano. And so when I saw that you worked with Meltrotter Mission, and then not only that, you felt called to live there, and your supervisor was questioning you. They tell me about how that conversation went when you said, "Hey, can I just stay here for the summer and spend more time with the residents here?"
Yes, honestly, I kind of surprised myself in that because that was not really some like a typical thing that I would think to do or ask to do, but I just sensed that that was what the Lord was leading me to. And so I started out volunteering with the children and women's wing of Meltrotter Ministries. And it was more like an after school effort. And then as the school year was winding down, I was just thinking about Jesus's incarnational ministry and how he dwelled with the people that he was ministering to. And I just got this wild idea, like, what if I could live in a room here at this homeless shelter for the summer? And so I asked my director, and she kind of just stopped and looked at me and, didn't really say anything at first. And then if I remember correctly, she kind of asked, like, you want to do what? Like you're requesting to live here. It was not something that they had ever done before, and they had to go and talk to some of the other leadership to, decide whether they would allow me to do that. And it was an experience. It definitely opened my eyes to more of what went on in that place, after hours and in the evening and during the nights. There were some, loud conversations that sometimes happen during the night there. And, but it definitely opened my eyes just to some of the needs, what life is like in that place. At that time, obviously it could have changed by now, but I was able to see the women in a different light and just be able to connect with the families in a different way when I was around all the time, eating meals with them, doing all the things.
My favorite phrase of that is the Jesus's incarnational ministry, because you're right, he did live with them. And I think there is a disconnect of when we are ministering to people and then we get to go home to our comfy couches and our TVs and our home cooked meals when others are really struggling and they don't have that same definition of home that we do. That just grew your heart even more towards missions. And so it brings us to our second portion of the conversation, which is more exciting. Cape Town, South Africa. You flew across the world to Cape Town, South Africa, not knowing anything about it. It says on page 111, "And this will be your office," Stefan announced, turning the handle on the door next to the coffee bar. "Well, yours and Kagiso's," he laughed. As the door opened, students crowded around from behind, awaiting my reaction. Across the middle of the room, a long strip of masking tape lined the floor. I squatted down to read the words scrawled across the tape in red marker. Anti-Kagiso force field. Tell me about your immersion in South African culture from West Michigan just moments before, and what a stark difference that was.
Yes, I went to South Africa only knowing one family. They had twin boys who studied with me for a year at Bible College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And they were the only people that I knew in that entire country. But I was very excited to spend what I thought would be one semester in Cape Town doing campus ministry and also taking some classes at a Bible college there. And so I did not know what to expect except what this family had shared with me. And I did definitely buy like a tourism book before I traveled. And I started to highlight some of the things that I wanted to do, which in hindsight, was rather ambitious because several of the places were like hours apart from each other. And I just thought, oh, one day I'll go here and one day I'll go there. So I was very naive about the whole thing. But I definitely had a honeymoon phase in the beginning of landing. I just thought everything was gorgeous and amazing and beautiful and just the best thing ever. And I kept calling my mom, which at the time, this was way back in 2002, and I had to use an international calling card on a landline, and it was the type of phone where if you pressed one number incorrectly, you had to hang up and start all over again. There was no, delete button and a cell phone. And so, it would take me forever to get through to her. But every time I called her, I would just gush about how amazing everything was and the beauty of the landscape, the diversity of the people, the food. And I just loved every bit. And so I thought I would be spending one semester, and I ended up extending my study permit within 2 months of being there for an extra 2 years so that I could have that option if I decided to stay on longer. As a spoiler alert for those who haven't read the book, those first 5 months ended up turning into 10 and a half years of living in Cape Town. And that anti-Kagiso force field that the students had laid down on masking tape on the bottom of my office to do student ministry was not successful because Kagiso and I ended up getting married. And so everything did happen quite quickly. Because we were together so much of the time, it didn't feel that quick because we were just spending so much time together. But I arrived in 2002. We got engaged in 2003. We got married in 2004, had our first baby in 2005. So those were some full and busy years, and I'm very thankful for them.
So you bring him home, and you have this collision of South Africa and Michigan because he's watching the Times Square ball drop for the first time, and I love how he's like, that's it? That's what we've been waiting here for? And I am with him because the ball drop needs to be revamped. Same thing with, get rid of the wallpaper and revamp the ball drop in New York City because what is so exciting about a ball dropping? I don't know. I mean, all the festivities around it, and sure that if you're there, it's amazing. And I do love the music and just having it on in the background while we're eating brownies and playing card games and, eating 5 meals in a row. That is very fun. But the actual ball dropping is pretty pointless.
Well, and in South Africa, because they are in the Southern Hemisphere, New Year's Eve is actually in the peak of their summer months. And so it is very hot in South Africa in December and January, which was also an adjustment for me. And so in their culture, it's like a big party in the streets wherever you go, and everyone is outside and they're grilling and they're visiting their neighbors and they're drinking Coke and they're just having this big party and they're shooting off fireworks and there's music and dancing and it's like a big thing. And then he comes to West Michigan in January and it's snowing and the wind chill is below 0 and he didn't own a winter coat before he got here and had never shoveled snow before. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna watch the ball drop, and here we are just sitting in my mom's house on our own without any people over, and we're watching this thing on TV. And he was like, that's what we've been sitting here waiting for. So definitely not quite the excitement that he was used to in South Africa.
So we can move on to the definition of home. And I say that because as you read the book, there's just such a pull toward each place. Your heart is so fully in Michigan with your family. And then you start your own family in South Africa. And so your heart is immersed in South Africa. And when you have your daughter and bring her to Michigan to meet her family there, it's all new for her. You say, she doesn't know the animals. She doesn't know the weather. She doesn't know the sound of people's voice and the familiar carpet and homes and trees that is just second nature for you. But it's like you're watching through her eyes and you realize, oh, this really isn't her home. Talk to me about your mom's illness and just the way that you felt torn every time you got on an airplane. And I think this book is really powerful because it shows how devastating life can be and also how beautiful, because, you love your husband, you love your family, you love South Africa, and yet you love your mom and your sister and your dad and Angela. And how can you be in two places at once? How can your heart be split between two continents?
Yeah, it was definitely a challenge, and one that I don't know that I navigated as well as I could. There were many tears along the way. My mom was first diagnosed with breast cancer when she was 50 years old, and it providentially happened the first diagnosis took place when I was back in Michigan after my first 5 months in Cape Town. I had already committed to go back to South Africa to continue ministry there. And then we received this very unexpected diagnosis, and she was a single mom, and my younger sister was finishing high school and just starting into college, and I was very torn about what I should do and what my responsibility was as her daughter and the oldest daughter, and yet committing to this other, ministry and people in South Africa. And I prayed about it, and my sister said, it's fine, you can go, I can take care of mom. And the prognosis at the time seemed promising. They thought they had caught it early, and they planned to do some surgery and chemo and radiation, but they were quite confident that with those treatments that she would be able to get rid of the cancer and go into remission. And so it seemed like they had a solid plan, and I ended up deciding to get on the plane, and that was an extremely difficult decision. I felt in ways as if I was abandoning my mom and my sister, and I didn't know if it was the right thing to do. And it was a challenge spiritually as well. I was definitely questioning the Lord and his timing and whether I was doing the right thing. And it was emotional. I don't want to sugarcoat that either. I definitely cried a lot, and yet the Lord over the years provided many opportunities for me to go back and visit. So she did end up doing better after that first year or so, and was able to enjoy a handful of years, about 4 years, before the cancer returned. And that was at that point, I was already married and had 2 children. Again, just torn of, I have this family that I'm growing in South Africa, and we're committed to work here, and yet my mom is suffering on the other side of the world. And if I was in South Africa, I could tell that I was a foreigner. I was an American and not in my home country. But then when I did travel back to Michigan, I also felt as if I had changed and the other people had changed, the place had changed, and I really struggled with, where do I belong? Where do I fit? Where am I supposed to be? And just continuing to seek the Lord and his direction for each year. Basically, we had to kind of question, are we still supposed to be here, or are we supposed to go back to the States?
I don't envy you having to make that decision. I mean, especially for your husband. He grew up in South Africa, and that was his home, and you knew what it felt like to be a foreigner, and yet that was what he was about to do. A couple beautiful things that I saw in your story as you were building your family was, first of all, you were able to adopt your nephew. Is that what it was?
Yes, so it was my husband's first cousin, technically.
Okay, and he was how old when you adopted him?
He was 6.5.
your explanation of the energy level in the house was explosive when he came. You were used to your daughter quietly coloring next to you, and then you had a little, 6-year-old boy who kept you on your toes. So tell me about the transition of, being a transracial family, and then all of a sudden you're an adoptive transracial family, and a bunch of new things were happening all at once.
Yes, that was another growing experience. At that point, we had two biological children. Our daughter was about 3, and our youngest son, was about 18 months old when we learned that my husband's cousin on his mom's side had been orphaned. His father, who was my husband's uncle, had passed away about 5 years prior, and then we learned that his biological mother had passed away. And so there was this quite immediate need for him to have a place to live, and my husband and I both felt burdened, and we were very convicted and confident right away that we wanted to take him in, and we asked other family members, and really there was no one else who was in a position to be able to do that at that time, and we were very willing and we wanted to, and so we learned about the need on a Wednesday, and by Saturday he was already coming back from Kimberley, South Africa. He had driven with his mom from Cape Town to Kimberley to pick up what would become our oldest son. And it was a very quick turnaround, just a handful of days from the decision to the actual reality happening. We did not have any preparations made. We did not have any clothing purchased or anything like that. He showed up with one suitcase, and that's the only belongings that he had. And he did not speak English when he arrived. So thankfully, my husband did speak the 2 languages that our oldest son was speaking then. But then my husband would go to work and leave me alone with these 3 kids, and one of whom did not speak English. So we had some interesting conversations, if you can call it that, with lots of hand motions. And I knew a few words here and there in the languages that he did speak. So I was concocting lots of sentences, with a couple words from each language and trying to make the best of it. I definitely learned more of those languages very quickly in those early months. And then funny enough, our 3-year-old daughter actually taught our 6-year-old English over time. She would go to the toy box and hold up a doll, and she would say doll, and she'd hold up a car and say car. And so she was very patient with him. But yes, we were living at the time in a fairly small apartment on the 2nd floor of a building in the city. We had no grass, no place to play outside, just a parking lot when you went downstairs. And I only knew how to parent a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So I had never reached that phase of being a parent of a 6-year-old. And suddenly I would come around, through the hallway and see someone swinging from the door frame in the air and, climbing on the counters and all kinds of things. And I was like, oh, I think we're going to have to start going to the park a little bit more often. So we had to make many trips to the park and try to be creative about how we could help him get rid of some of his energy. And in the end, we ended up being able to find a place that we could move to that did have a bit of a backyard. And the behavior issues definitely decreased once he had some space to move around outside. It was an adjustment.
Yeah, they do. They need to run around. I swear there's not enough outside space for my girls. They have so much energy, and I still get to the end of the day and I'm like, how many hours have you been moving today? And I still think you have the abundance of energy that cannot be depleted. So I'm not sure how to crack that code, but yes, going outside definitely helps. And it's almost a necessity. I think if we don't get outside, if they don't move their bodies often, it's a disaster for everybody. I really love the premise of this book. I think your vulnerability was beautiful, Kate. I thank you so much for being vulnerable and just sharing with us some of your worst days, because as I was reading, I thought, oh good, I'm glad I'm not the only one who has felt this way. And it's like misery loves company. I've been away from Michigan since I was 21 years old, and I've only gotten to visit not really on a regular basis. I don't have like a set time of the year that we go. You say on page 232, when you're talking about your kids and your mom, my kids struggled being back in Cape Town too. They missed grandma. They didn't understand why they couldn't talk to her on the phone anymore. They missed the luxuries of America. I saw my own homesickness in them. So we talked about the aches and we talked about the homesickness. And we remembered that we're supposed to be homesick no matter where we live because we're not home yet. And the book does talk about your mother passing away, and that leads me to your other book, Letters to Grief. You've said multiple times that Letters to Grief is a book that nobody wants to write, and you just got an award for it, but you still are like, I didn't even want to write this book. Yes, you're thankful that you got the chance to, and it's a beautiful opportunity, and it's a beautiful book. I think that your writing in this is so poetic and so beautiful. If you can make grief beautiful, I feel like you've made grief beautiful, or at least just the processing of it. Your metaphors are rich and your words are rich, and I can see how this little book will really encourage someone who finds themselves in the pit of grief without a lot of words to process what they're feeling. But A Place to Land does talk about grief, and it does talk about your experience losing your mom. And how has God taught you in all of your adventures and all of your moves and all of the countries you've lived in? How has God taught you that you are not home yet, and to find your peace in Him and not necessarily, where your feet land? Because we know in the foster care and adoption world, a lot of kids who come from trauma have a sense of loss when it comes to home. They are in another home. They are in family members' home. They are in a foster home. They move to another foster home. Several of them have had several homes, and their belongings have been taken away from them or destroyed or lost or replaced by something else unfamiliar. So just talk to me about the truth that you have gained in all these years of learning what home really means to you.
Yes, I definitely used to be more sentimental about the physical aspects of home and the material things that gave me symbols and signs that this was my home. And as I have traveled back and forth across the ocean and moved through many different rental homes and things like that, the Lord has really helped me to loosen my grip on this material world. And after my mom passed away, I did start thinking more about heaven and eternity, and then, longing for eternity more as a believer. And yet the Lord also convicted me during that time, like, why is it only now that I know my mom is with the Lord in heaven that I am more eager to be there? Why was I not primarily eager to be there because of Him and because of His presence? And so I've had to work through that as well, and just my priorities and my desires and what I long for, and ultimately realizing that it's okay if we don't feel at home in this world, because for those who are believers, this is not our true home, and it's just a shadow. There are things that point us to our true home that we can enjoy here and take advantage of. But at the end of the day, this is not our final dwelling place. And so I do find hope in that, especially when things are difficult and when there are challenges that cannot be easily remedied or resolved, that it's okay because it is going to be temporary and something better is coming.
So to wrap up, thank you so much for sharing about your memoir, Place to Land, and also Letters to Grief. Is there anything that you would want to say to someone who is struggling, whether it's a foster and adoptive family, or a transracial family, or someone whose heart feels like they're in two or more places and just has a hard time grasping the idea of home? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would just encourage you to remember that this life is not all that there is, that for those who hope and trust in Jesus, that we have so much more to look forward to. And yes, we do get glimpses of that here that we can definitely enjoy and delight in, but we ultimately have a greater place that we will be dwelling and a much greater presence that we will be enjoying in the Lord. And that as we're going through these struggles that we just cannot find a resolution for, and they just seem like they won't end, or we feel as though we don't belong, that we do have a place of belonging, and it will be a place where there will be no more tears or death or dying or crying or, any shame that the Bible talks about. And so I'm just so looking forward to that.
What are your recent projects, and where can my listeners find you online, and what do you have coming up next?
Yes, so my 2 most recently published works are called Letters to Grief, which you mentioned, which just won the ECPA 2025 Christian Book Award in the Devotion and Gift category, which I'm very thankful for. And then sort of a companion book that was published by the same publisher around the same time is called 101 Prayers for Comfort in Difficult Times, which is a little gift book that's easy to use either for yourself or for someone that you'd like to give a gift to. So those are available now. And then my next project is in the pipeline. It will be released, Lord willing, in early 2026. And I've actually never publicly announced the title, but I'm happy to share it with you. It has been determined by my publisher. It is a 52-entry devotional resource, and the title is Longing for Home, 52 Reflections on the Hope of Heaven.
I love how all of your books are related, but they do grow, with time. You're advancing to different subjects, whatever God is teaching you. Our experiences, whether they are hard or beautiful. It's cool to see how connected your books are.
Yes.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Book Therapy. For all the details about the author, the book, and what we talked about today, please see the show notes. As always, if you enjoy this podcast, please leave us an honest review on Spotify or Apple. This helps get the word out. And even better, if you know of a foster adoptive family and you think this episode will encourage them, go ahead and send them a text, because not only will it brighten their day, but it will give them another resource, another tool as they are doing the hard work of loving and serving vulnerable children. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We will see you next time.